Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Bob Kincaid, thank you. It's so nice to hear your voice back here at the Virtual Center after so long. I was going to make a comment that Agnes must have a frog in her throat or something today, but I didn't think that was appropriate, because it is a pleasure to hear your voice again, and it was just great fun just chatting with you for a few moments before we went on the air today. It is Wednesday. Today is the 23rd day of November in the year 2016, and this is our third broadcast this week here, live broadcast at the Virtual Center for the study of the Constitution and civic responsibility. And once again, let me say what a pleasure it is to be with you and have this opportunity. And with Bob being here today in the studios, I just want to make the comment that how much I appreciate the opportunity to present a program like the Virtual Center on a regular basis, and how necessary it is that we continue to support a network like the Head On Radio Network in order to make sure that we can do that. It's very important to keep this voice on the air, not just this program, but the programs and the perspective that are continually raised on the Head On Radio Network. I think with some of the things that are going on right now, with the transition to the Trump administration and some of the concerns that we talked about yesterday, the issues of race, the issue of bigotry, the issues of bullying, and all the rest of it, I do believe that a voice like that of the Head On Radio Network, it becomes more and more vital to preserving the nature of the Republic as the founders created it. So again, I do appreciate the support that many of you continue to give to the Head On Radio Network, and I hope you'll do that. And again, I just want to personally say how much I appreciate the opportunity to be here. As we approach the end of our fourth year, it's absolutely unbelievable that 3 months from now we will be celebrating our fourth anniversary here at the Virtual Center. That's a little bit unbelievable, I do believe. I encourage you to share, as I do every day, your thoughts and your concerns, ideas, questions, whatever, with our other listeners here at the Virtual Center. We do have a phone number, and I want to give you that number, but more importantly, I want to precede the number itself with a statement encouraging folks to take advantage of it. It's not just there as as an afterthought. It's a key part of what we're about, and I do hope that you will feel comfortable using it and going on the air today. You have the additional perk, as it were, if you do call, of having Bob Kincaid in the studios of Head On today. So when you call, you'll probably get him on the phone, and he'll get you on the air with us. The number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. And, of course, let me say again that 4676 on your phone keypad translates into Horn, H-O-R-N. So that, if this helps you remember the number better, 304-663-HORN, H-O-R-N. If you're a little bit reluctant to get on the air and you trust me to get your thoughts or ideas or questions or whatever on the air for you, I'd love to do that. I'd be more than willing. Just drop me an email. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, O-B-R-I-E-N, 906@gmail.com. And finally, I do call your attention to our Facebook page. I don't believe since yesterday's program I put anything on the Facebook page. I posted a number of links in the last several days on it. There were 3 or 4 issues, and I think we dealt with a couple of them yesterday. The alt-right conference in Washington, D.C., which is getting so much attention. I've seen that particular article, or the New York Times article covering that particular event and the speech of the moderator of that event, Spencer, Robert Spencer. I think it's Robert Spencer. I've seen numbers of references because I think the Heil to the people, the Sieg Heil idea, really drives home the link to Hitlerism and all the negatives that are associated with what's happening in the country as we go through the transition into the Trump administration. And I think many of us realize or know that yesterday afternoon, Donald Trump sat down for an extensive hour-long interview at the New York Times with the publisher of the paper, Sulzberger, and many of the more prominent columnists at the New York Times, among them Tom Friedman. And I think and I read the let me say first of all that the full transcript of that interview is on the New York Times webpage. If you go to nytimes.com, on the front page you will see the complete transcript of yesterday's interview with President-elect Donald Trump and the lead voices for the New York Times. Given the hostility that Donald Trump expressed during the campaign for the New York Times, and again, early in the interview, Donald Trump makes the point that he felt that the New York Times was incredibly negative toward him in the campaign. So, again, I think on both sides of that particular table, as it were, there is a sense that what we did was justified. Donald Trump believes that the attacks he made against the New York Times were more than warranted by the treatment that his campaign received from the New York Times. On the other hand, the Times kind of interpreted Donald Trump's regular attacks on the New York Times as Trump's effort to take on the media and use an anti-media appeal to solicit votes. So basically, I think the interview yesterday is very significant, and there's a couple of portions of that I'd like to share with you as part of today's program. One thing before we get into anything too substantive in today's program, I want to share a little bit of a story with you. Bob Kincaid being back in the studios today reminds me of this. I've mentioned every day when I give my email address, the email address, which is a Gmail address, it is WAOBrien906. And I think one day, some months ago, I shared with you where the 906 came from. It's not a random number assigned to me by Gmail. It's a number that I requested when I set up the email address, the email account itself. 906 was my dad's favorite number. As I mentioned, my dad used to be involved in years and years ago in Boston in off-track betting when it really wasn't legal. And he used to play the numbers each day, and his favorite number was 906. And the origins of that were that an apartment that we lived in when we were much younger, and I was much younger, or still living at home, we moved into this apartment into a town adjoining Boston proper, right across the line. And it was really interesting, in fact, because we never owned a car. At least my dad never did. And so he would go to and from work on public transportation. And the public transportation ran right to the edge of right to the line that separated Boston from from the town of Dedham. And our apartment was the first street across that line, the first side street across that line in Dedham. What that meant was that we had a separate phone number and a separate exchange from what we had when we were within the limits of the city of Boston. And the phone number that we were assigned, and at that time you were assigned a phone number, of course, by the phone company, and you rented your phone. The number that we were assigned was 9069. So my dad, of course, jumped all over that number and used to play that number regularly. The number of times that number came out for him was incredible. And he was convinced. My dad more than once talked about this and made the comment that it seemed like every time money got tight and every time he was uncertain as to what he was going to do in terms of buying Christmas presents, he was very, very generous with us kids at Christmas time. And he always said that it seemed like 9069 always bailed him out at Christmas time, year after year after year. So anyway, it's that was his favorite number, and he hit it a number of times, 906, and then the four numbers were 9069. The reason I've mentioned that before here on the program some months ago. But the reason I mention it now is because the other night before last, my brother called from the Boston area, from Massachusetts, rather late in the evening. What he was telling me was, and this is really interesting, that on the local news in Massachusetts coming out of Boston night before last was a story about a fishing vessel that was sinking off the coast of Cape Cod, off Buzzards Bay on Cape Cod. And there were live pictures of the boat, the sailing ship that was taking in water. It was half submerged. And they had it on the evening news, and my brother said he absolutely couldn't believe it because on the back of the boat, the number of the boat was 9069. So he felt the first thing he had to do was call me and let me know. And we were laughing on the phone because if something like that had happened and my dad was still alive, he'd have been gone. He'd have been down playing that number because that was exactly the kind of coincidence or fortuitous circumstance that Dad used to wait for. I remember when he used to talk about going to the horse races when horse racing in his life was so important. He would go, and he used to say he'd stand there as they would parade the horses in front of the grandstand, and he'd always wait for one of the horses to look at him or wink at him or something, and he was waiting for that sign. So the sign was 9069 on that boat. My brother called, and we kind of joked about it, and we said maybe we ought to run out and buy a ticket as well. I talked to my brother last night, and he did do that, in fact, and he does not gamble at all. He said that was the first one, probably, ticket that he's bought in probably 8 to 10 years. And it didn't come out, of course. But anyway, that number reminds me of it. And Bob being in the studio reminded me of that story because I remember it was some months ago when I shared that where that 906 came from anyway. But anyway, that's just an aside. But it's kind of interesting, and I wanted to share it with you. I don't know. I may be getting myself in trouble here by putting some of this stuff on the air, and it's recorded in the archives of this program. But be that as it may, it's the truth, and I'm sticking to it. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it, as they say. One of the things that I wanted to talk about, and I had mentioned yesterday that I had thought we pretty much covered the concept of the Electoral College. And I pretty well felt comfortable that we did. And you can remember that one of the things I mentioned yesterday was a reference to Federalist number 68, Hamilton's Federalist paper number 68. And I had mentioned that the Electoral College is really pretty well covered in that particular Federalist paper. And what I had said yesterday is maybe at some future date we'd look at Federalist number 68. but that just keep in mind that whenever anybody mentions the Electoral College to you, if you can remember, Federalist number 68 really is Hamilton's defense of the Electoral College. Well, after the program yesterday, I pulled up Federalist number 68 and I reread it. And the more carefully I read it, the more I began to realize that it's probably a pretty good idea, before we leave the subject totally, to look rather carefully at number 68, because there's quite a bit in it. So what I thought I would do at the beginning of our program today, and I don't really know how long this would take. Again, of course, if somebody calls on it and makes a comment and wants to talk about the Electoral College, then I would love to do that. But yesterday, I think I dealt with one perspective on the Electoral College that we hadn't covered. We covered it pretty thoroughly on Monday, I believe. But one of the perspectives, one of the issues we hadn't covered, were the arguments for replacing the Electoral College. And on yesterday's program, which is our abbreviated program on Tuesdays, one of the things that we spent some time on were some of the major arguments for abolishing the Electoral College. And these aren't specific to this particular election, because again, the factor that's probably weighing heaviest for abolishing the Electoral College right now, related to this particular election of November 2016, is the fact that Hillary Clinton is leading in the popular vote by so much that her victory in the popular vote has exceeded 1.7 million and is moving toward 2 million popular votes. And so there is a distinct possibility that when this is finally done, that Hillary Clinton could have close to 2 million votes more than Donald Trump in the popular vote. And if ever there was an issue that seemed to be screaming for the abolition of the Electoral College, this fact is probably weighing very heavily on people's minds as a reason for abolishing the Electoral College. Two things that I will say on that particular issue. One is, and we'll get to it in a moment, that Donald Trump addressed the issue of the Electoral College versus the popular vote in his interview with the New York Times yesterday. And I printed off the relevant comments related to that issue because it was so pertinent to what we've been talking about. But first, I wanted to touch on, or very briefly review, some of the major arguments for abolishing the Electoral College. And one of the major ones is the fact that there could be a difference between the electoral vote and the popular vote. It happened a couple of times up to this century. But as we pointed out, it's happened twice in the 4 presidential elections we've had in this new century already. And now, with the popular vote approaching 2 million over Trump's electoral vote total, over Donald Trump's popular vote total, the pressure to abolish the Electoral College is becoming extreme right now, especially coming from Democrats, supporters of Hillary Clinton, understandably. So the first issue is this division, if you will, between the popular vote and the Electoral College. Most of the time, up until this century, most of the time, there hasn't been a problem. The two votes have been consistent. The same candidate who won the popular vote won the Electoral College vote. Only a couple of times did that not happen. But now it's happened twice, 2 out of 4 in this new century. So that's one of the major reasons. That's long been one of the major reasons for abolishing the Electoral College, is the looming likelihood or possibility that this would indeed happen. Now it's happened twice. The second thing, and we mentioned these yesterday, the second thing, a second argument in favor of abolishing the Electoral College is our long commitment to the principle of one man, one vote. And the fact that the existence of the Electoral College pretty much skews or disrupts the balance in if one is dedicated to the principle of one man, one vote. And yesterday, in touching upon this, I was comparing West Virginia and the state of California. And in preparation for today, I did a little bit of investigation, a little bit of research on this, so I could speak with a little bit more authority, because yesterday, as you recall, I wasn't exactly sure. So I looked up the population of West Virginia, and according to the latest figures, the population of West Virginia is a little bit more than 1.8 million. In 2014, 1.85 million. So let's say 1.8 million for purposes. And the state is awarded 5 electoral votes, 3 congressional districts plus the 2 senators, totals 5 electoral votes, and that's the way Article 2 explains the distribution of electoral votes. The number of congressional districts, the number of congressmen, plus the 2 senators, gives us the total of electoral votes that particular state will have. West Virginia has 5. If you divide 5 into 1.8 million, you get 360,000. So in other words, each electoral vote in West Virginia represents 360,000 citizens. And so if you multiply 360,000 by 5, you get to 1.8 million. So that means that each elector reflects or represents 360,000 citizens. California, the population as of 2014 was 38.8 million. And California has 55 electoral votes, 33 congressional districts. In other words, there were 33 Congress positions from California plus the 2 senators. And so that means California has 55 votes. If you divide 55 into 38.8 million, you get in the neighborhood of 709,000 per elector. So the difference between California and West Virginia is 360,000 citizens per electoral vote. In California, it's 709,000 citizens per electoral vote. What that means, obviously, is that it's almost half. That suggests that the vote of every citizen in West Virginia counts almost double what a citizen of California's vote does on the principle, if measured on the principle of one man, one vote. And it's the Electoral College that really keeps this disparity afloat, as it were. So, in a sense, the point that I was making yesterday was that a major question, a major issue in support of the argument to abolish the Electoral College is that one man, one vote becomes impossible so long as you have a system like the Electoral College in place. The third thing, which was related to that, it seems to me, the third reason that some people want to abolish the Electoral College is because the Electoral College artificially inflates small states, the influence of small states. And I think we talked about that yesterday. And finally, a fourth major reason for those who advocate the end of the Electoral College is that the Electoral College exacerbates the influence of third-party candidates. The existence of the Electoral College makes it possible for a third-party candidate to cost one of the major parties the electoral votes in that particular state. In other words, by drawing away from one of the two major party candidates in a state, the third party candidate can almost guarantee the victory of the other party. We saw that in the election of 2000 with Ralph Nader. There's no question that Ralph Nader cost Al Gore the presidency in the 2000 election. So it seems to me that those probably are the major four arguments against the continuation of the Electoral College. The disparity between popular votes and electoral votes, the violation of the one-man, one-vote principle, the artificial inflation of the influence of small states as a result of the Electoral College, and the overarching increase in the influence of third-party candidates because of the Electoral College. Those are the major arguments. And the fact that the first one has become so evident as a result of this particular election, that means that the pressure is on. In fact, there's a website where people are being asked to sign their name, sign on to a petition which encourages electors to not follow the Electoral College principle and cast their ballots as the state voted in this particular election, but urging electors to exercise their independence and vote not for Donald Trump, but for Hillary Clinton. So that's how much influence the anti-Electoral College sentiment in the country is having right now. I think it's very significant. In the interview yesterday with the New York Times, Donald Trump addressed, if I can find it. Actually, I may have misplaced it. Here it is. Donald Trump addressed the issue of the Electoral College yesterday. And one of the things he talked about during the interview was the fact that he's getting, he believes, 85% of the military vote, the absentee ballot from military coming in around the world. He said that there's about 180,000 votes from military votes still to be counted, and at this point he's getting on average 85% of those. And then he said, and I'm going to read exactly the transcript so that, I'm not, obviously this may not sound, the King's English may not be perfect, but this is the way it reads. Donald Trump speaking. So we won that by a lot of votes, and we had a great victory. We had a great victory. I think it would have been easier because I see every once in a while somebody says, well, the popular vote. Trump goes on. Well, the popular vote would have been a lot easier, but it's a whole different campaign. I would have been in California. I would have been in Texas, Florida, and New York. And we wouldn't have gone anywhere else. Which is, I'd rather do the popular vote from the standpoint, I think we do actually as well or better. It's a whole different campaign. It's like if you're a golfer, it's like match play versus stroke play. it's a whole different game. But I think the popular vote would have been easier in a true sense because you'd go to a few places. I think that's the genius of the Electoral College. I was never a fan of the Electoral College until now. And Sulzberger opens up and says, until now, and then there's general laughter in the room. And that's what we talked about yesterday. That with the results of this election and Hillary winning the popular vote by as much as she's winning it, Republicans now have become big fans of the Electoral College, where they weren't before. And now here's Donald Trump saying that he too has become a fan of the Electoral College as a result of what's happened this year. And then Trump goes on. Until now, I guess now I like it for two reasons. What it does is it gets you out to see states that you'd never see otherwise. It's very interesting, like Maine. I went to Maine 4 times. I went to Maine because everybody was saying that you can get to 269, but there's not a path to 270. We learned that was false because we ended up with that. And then Reince Priebus opens up in the meeting and said, we've got to get to Michigan. We got to get Michigan in here. And then Trump goes on and says, but there is no path to 270. You have to get one, and you have to get the one in Maine. So we kept going back to Maine, and we did get that vote in Maine. Actually, he says, we went to 22 states, whereas if you're going for the popular vote, you'd probably go to 4 or 3. It could be 3. You wouldn't leave New York. You'd stay in New York, and you'd stay in California. So there's a certain genius about it, and I like it either way, but it's sort of interesting. What Trump is saying there is exactly what we were talking about yesterday, that the nature of the popular vote suggests that if you abolish the Electoral College and you replace it with the direct election of the president by the people, then that's going to mean that the presidential campaign is only going to focus on the large states. The small states will never again have anything to do with the election of the president because there'll be so few votes, relatively speaking, in those states compared to the large states that the West Virginias and the Rhode Islands and the Wyomings and the Utahs and they basically will get no attention in presidential campaigns at all. In this one, you'll recall, New Hampshire, 4 electoral votes, was a major focus. Here's Donald Trump talking about the fact that he went to Maine 4 times. If we had direct election of the president, Donald Trump would have been wasting his time going to Maine. There would be no reason to go there. So in a sense, then, what that means is the Electoral College means that the small states play a role, which they wouldn't play if we had direct election of the president. On the other hand, the fact of the matter is because of the Electoral College, the small states do more than just play a role. They play an inflated role. They become critical in determining the total number of electoral votes. So I think it's very relevant and timely that Donald Trump addressed the issue yesterday of the Electoral College. And then he goes on, and let me finish because I don't like to stop this in midstream, so to speak, because he goes on and still talking about this. He said, but we had an amazing period of time. I got to know the country. We've got a great country. We're a great, great people, and the enthusiasm was really incredible. The Los Angeles Times had a poll, which was interesting because I was always up in that poll. They had something, I guess, that is a modern-day technique in polling called enthusiasm. They added an enthusiasm factor. And my people had great enthusiasm, and Hillary's people didn't have enthusiasm. And in the end, she didn't get the African American vote, and we ended up close to 15 points, as you know. We started off at 1. We ended up with almost 15. More importantly, a lot of people didn't show up because the African American community liked me. They liked what I was saying. I think this is significant because the polls did get right. As much as the polls got wrong, this particular phenomenon or issue they got right. And that is that it really wasn't necessary. What Donald Trump is saying here is that it wasn't necessary for him to win the African American vote. He got 15% of it. But the fact of the matter is, what he had to do was appeal to the African American community enough that they weren't persuaded to show up for Hillary. So the result was that if Trump was successful in appealing to the African American community, which he says here that he did indeed do, then what the result was is that these people didn't vote at all. Hillary's whole campaign was based on the fact that African Americans had to come to the polls and vote for her. She wasn't successful. She wasn't successful because so many stayed home. What Donald Trump is saying is that the reason they stayed home is because they started to like what I was saying. Not enough to come and vote for me, but enough to not go vote for her. I think, and the polls got that right. So that is very, very significant. It's not a matter of winning the votes of the people who show up, but a major factor is just getting people to not show up. That was the whole idea of the issue of Republicans in many states doing all they could do to suppress the turnout, to suppress the African American vote by requiring things like photo IDs and all of these other things. The result was that these election laws tended to suppress the vote in many places. And in most of those places, they were Democratic votes that were being suppressed because the population being most directly affected was the African American community. So Donald Trump is acknowledging here the realities of electoral politics. That it's not only the votes you get, but if you can have enough influence to keep the other side from getting those votes, then it benefits you directly. And then finally, Trump addresses the issue of the women's vote. Again, his final comment on African Americans. So they didn't necessarily vote for me, but they didn't show up, which was a big problem that she had. I ended up doing very well with women, which I never understood why I was doing poorly, because we'd go to rallies and we'd have so many women holding up signs, women for Trump. But I kept reading polls saying that I'm not doing well with women. I think whoever is doing it here would say that we did very well with women, especially certain women. So again, what Trump is saying is that the polls were wrong in that he didn't do as poorly with the women vote as the polls predicted. But he did do what they predicted with the African American vote, which is keep it from coming out for Hillary. I think that is extremely significant. So what Trump is saying in this interview yesterday afternoon with the New York Times pretty much reinforces the things we've said about the Electoral College. That in this particular election, it's the Electoral College structure that enabled Trump to win. But what he points out is the realities of the Electoral College, and that is, if it was the popular vote that you were after, you'd conduct your whole campaign differently. You wouldn't go to the Maines and the New Hampshires and the Colorados and the Nevadas and the Salt Lake Cities and all the rest of them. You would focus on New York and California and Texas, on the big states, Illinois. But you wouldn't worry about the less populous states. It would totally skew the way you conducted your campaign. It would change the way the election is currently, the elections are currently happening. Again, I think the major factor that we're going to have to assess is the impact of social media. The impact of the immediate, instantaneous communication with millions and millions of voters. The number that I saw yesterday with Donald Trump's Twitter account was 15 million people connected to his Twitter account, which means that he has instantaneous communication with something in excess of 15 million citizens. And the power that that gives him and will give him through his administration on particular issues that are being weighed in Congress, for example. He's going to be able to call into play tremendous popular pressure on Congress to pass or not pass certain pieces of legislation that it's considering. Traditionally, Congress has operated behind closed doors. And what I mean is, it's only rarely that the public has become directly involved in what's going on in Congress. It's usually the president that's able to bring that out by going directly to the American people. In previous administrations of late, on television, the president would go and give a national address on television, which all the networks would cover, and encourage people to make their voices heard by petitioning or calling the congressman or whatever. And oftentimes that would be enough to bring popular pressure on particular pieces of legislation that Congress was considering at that particular time. Theodore Roosevelt, of course, is the one who originated the idea of the so-called bully pulpit, the power of the president that the executive branch of government had that the legislative and judicial branches didn't, which is the ability to go directly to the American people and bring the people's influence to bear on what government was doing. With social media and software programs like Twitter, for example, that becomes a key factor. I think it's a key factor in not tampering with the Electoral College at this point, because I don't believe we really know the full impact of what social media is going to mean in terms of the influence of the people on what government is doing. In effect, the social media opens the closed doors of Congress and makes what Congress is doing known to the general public, huge portion of the general public. And the president can do that on his Twitter account. And Donald Trump has said that he has no intention of abandoning Twitter once he's sworn into office. He recognizes that this is a major source of his power, and he's not going to give it up. So again, I think this particular issue of the Electoral College is critically important, and I trust that we haven't given it too much time, but on the other hand, I think it's worth all the time that we have given it, because it is such a very, very important issue. I mentioned Federalist number 68. And I had said yesterday that you could read it at your leisure. I've reread it since yesterday. And I believe that it's a critical piece to the whole story. I don't think the story of the Electoral College is complete unless you incorporate what's in Federalist number 68. And in 68, Hamilton's entire approach, his strategy in 68, is to defend the structure, the language of Article 2, the Electoral College, and the explanation for the selection of the president. And he defends it, defends what's in it, to the point that he says at the very beginning of number 68, that the Electoral College, and I think this is very significant, the Electoral College is the only part of the system of any consequence which has escaped without severe censure, or which has received the slightest mark of approbation from its opponents. Basically, what Hamilton is saying here is that opponents of the Constitution are not criticizing the Electoral College. They're pretty much willing to go along with the Electoral College. It's the one piece of the Constitution that's not being attacked by somebody. And Hamilton believes that's because the content, the substance of the Electoral College is so timely and so pertinent. It addresses the concerns that people had about the selection of the president. But again, this reinforces the theme, it seems to me, that we took when we first addressed the issue of the Electoral College, and that is that there really isn't an intent here. What Article 2 of the Constitution related to the election of the president does is touch on the number of concerns or fears that the founders had about alternative ways of choosing the president. And without going through all that again, the general conclusion was, and Madison agrees with it, Hamilton agrees with it, they all basically agree with it, that the best way to go in order to avoid all the other problems that choosing the president might raise is to rely on the people to do it. By going directly to the people and having the people involved in the selection of the president, there's so much to be gained, Hamilton says in 68, and so little risk. It's one of the few places in the Constitution which isn't being challenged. Basically, he says that the realities of the Electoral College are that the electoral system means that you're selecting a group of people for one job and one job only. They aren't politicians. They can't be politicians. They can't be holders of any offices. They have to be people totally disengaged from government who are brought together to perform this one political function, which is to cast their ballot for the President of the United States. And once that's over, they fade back into the general population again. What that means is that this is happening in every state. It's happening in congressional districts in every state. And what that means is it's happening in so many different places at the same time that it's a system that can't be rigged. It's a system that can't be tampered with or influenced by anybody. It's the perfect system for choosing the president. because choosing the president is loaded with potential for all sorts of problems in so many different ways. Letting Congress do it would violate separation of powers. Letting state legislatures do it would artificially inflate the power of the states. So the best thing is to include the people. But since the people don't have the perspective to do it well, the best thing to do, and yet still involve the people, is let the people choose the people who will cast their ballots for the president. And the thinking is that the people in each state will select the people best qualified in that state to make an important decision like this. Hamilton tells us in number 68 that the system is ideal. It excludes people who are connected to government in any way. It becomes tamper-proof, if you will. It's a perfect system. And it means that the president's power is based on the will of a group of people that disappear once the president is selected. So it guarantees the independence of the president, because nobody controls the president except the people, and the organized group of people which picked him has disappeared after the act of selection is over. I've marked one particular paragraph of number 68, which I wanted to share with you because I think it raises the specter of the social media issue that we talked about. This is about 2/3 of the way through Federalist number 68. Hamilton says the following: the process of election affords a moral certainty that the office of president will never fall to the lot of any man who is not in an eminent degree endowed with the requisite qualifications. Let me repeat that sentence because I messed up the reading. The process of election affords a moral certainty that the office of president will never fall to the lot of any man who's not in an eminent degree endowed with the requisite qualifications. We're going to get the best people chosen as candidates for president by this system. It stands to reason that the masses, that the people choosing the people to choose the president, by definition means that when the votes are cast for president, it's going to be among the very best candidates qualified. Talents for low intrigue and the little arts of popularity may alone suffice to elevate a man to the first honors in a single state, but it will require other talents and a different kind of merit to establish him in the esteem and confidence of the whole Union, or of so considerable a portion of it as would be necessary to make him a successful candidate for the distinguished office of President of the United States. The wrong person could get the nod within a state. It could be that the people of that state would focus on a person that they wanted who might not be the best. But the fact of the matter is, when you take all of it and move it to the national stage, you eliminate these people who really aren't qualified. You guarantee that the final selection is going to focus on people who really are qualified. It will not be too strong to say that there will be a constant probability of seeing the station filled by characters preeminent for ability and virtue. Basically, what Hamilton is talking about there is what Madison talked about in Federalist Number 10 in relation to Congress. The idea of enlarging the sphere. And by enlarging the sphere, you guarantee that the only people that will emerge preeminently in a large sphere are the best known, most qualified people. The more people, the larger the constituency, the more you guarantee that only the best people will rise to the top. That's the benefit of the Electoral College, Hamilton is saying. What I'm asking you to think about is that the social media issue, the instantaneous communication with 15 million people that Donald Trump has on Twitter, violates that principle. That kind of direct, instantaneous communication with such a large block of voters, large block of citizens. Obviously, you assume that the people that are on his Twitter account are voters. I think you can make that assumption. Then what that means is that through his Twitter account, he's controlling, he's influencing a significant portion of the electorate. What that means is he's able to offset the kind of filters or the kinds of checks that Hamilton is talking about here. The idea of the enlarged sphere, of moving from the state level to the national level, and what that does in terms of elevating only preeminent people. That factor is missing once you introduce into the equation the idea of social media, the idea of Twitter. I think then it's very important as a final issue with the Electoral College to incorporate Hamilton's defense of the Electoral College in Federalist number 68. I think it's important to recognize that Hamilton says at the outset of 68 that the Electoral College does exactly what the founders hoped it would do. It covers all the bases. It eliminates all the worst possibilities for electing the president, and instead focuses on the best way to have the people do it, and at the same time have them do it well. I think it's a very, very important concept to include in the overall equation. With that, I really do think that we've covered the Electoral College. I don't know anything more that we might be able to do with it, but I think it's incredibly important, and I think that we're going to be seeing in coming days and weeks increased pressure to abolish the Electoral College. It's not going to be that easy, because what we're talking about here is a constitutional amendment, and those are not easy to pass. Let me suggest one final thing. I believe that there's no way we're going to be able to avoid the convening of an Article 5 constitutional convention. I think the degree to which Republicans have been able to seize control of so many states almost pretty much guarantees that the 2/3 of states necessary to convene a constitutional convention will happen. And I'm really worried about that for reasons that we've talked about before. But let me add one thing related to the Electoral College. I don't think abolishing the Electoral College is going to be on the agenda of that kind of a convention, because I believe the people calling it are going to be people who don't want to abolish the Electoral College, but want to retain it. And the reason they'll want to retain it is because they've been able to seize control of the process. It is the way the Electoral College operates that has dictated how those who are moving towards state by state control of government have moved. In other words, the extent to which Republicans have been able to seize control of so many state governments, the reason they did that is because the structure of the Electoral College almost mandated that that's the way they proceed. Now that they've been successful, or almost successful, and I'm guessing that they'll be fully successful in convening the convention, I don't think they're going to abolish the Electoral College when that's what really has given them this opportunity in the first place. So in spite of the fact that there are a lot of people who want to abolish the Electoral College, I don't think it's going to happen in an Article 5 convention, because the people who are going to control that convention support the Electoral College, just as Donald Trump supports the Electoral College. So with that, I think actually we've reached the top of the hour. So I didn't anticipate that we'd take a full hour on the Electoral College, not after all we've done. But I think we're on the edge of, I mean, we could say that maybe we haven't beaten that issue to death yet, but we're coming pretty close. So I think we'll stop. And I'd like to pause and take a 5-minute break and then get into our second hour here at the Virtual Center. And the first issue that I'd like to deal with in our next segment is an issue that's getting a lot of attention of late. And that's the so-called Emoluments Clause of the Constitution of the United States. Most people had never even heard of the Emoluments Clause. It's in there, it's in the Constitution, but not that many people have been focusing on it. But they're focusing on it now, thanks to the candidacy of Donald Trump. I think we'll deal with that in our next segment. But right now, we're going to pause and take a 5-minute break. You were listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Thank you.
We now return to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Here's your host, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Hey, we got both of them in the studio today. This is great. Welcome, Agnes. Thank you.
Thank you,
Welcome.
Bill.
Welcome to our second hour here at the Virtual Center on this Wednesday. Today is the 23rd day of November, the day before Thanksgiving. And I can't believe that we began the program today without acknowledging that fact. Thanksgiving is an important holiday, I believe. It's you know, if I have a favorite holiday, it's this one. It seems to me that unlike other holidays that have been affected in so many different ways by the market and by advertising and media and all the rest of it, this one ultimately gets back to the very important issue of recognizing and giving thanks for what we've been blessed with. That includes things, but it also includes people who are close to us. And I think this is the holiday that gives us the opportunity to appreciate the people that we are all blessed to have around us. And I think it's an important thing for all of us to acknowledge and to keep in mind as to how important people are in our lives. I think, there are so many things in our day-to-day lives that put our focus on things, on issues, on money, on resources, on things of this world. But the fact of the matter is, it's people. It's the relationships that we have with people. In the senior citizens class that I began teaching on Fridays, we're dealing, as for the very first issue we're dealing with, is Jefferson's dialogue between his head and his heart. And one of the things that Jefferson makes very clear in this is that the reason he believes, and I think if you were to judge this particular dialogue, you'd have to say that in Jefferson's mind, the heart wins out over the head. And part of the reason for that is because the key thing that throws the balance, the weight in favor of the heart, is the other relationships we have between other people, those people that are close to us. The people not only that we care about, but the people who care about us. This is a holiday,
Bill,
that is designated just for them.
Bill,
Yes.
we have Horzak calling in.
Oh, great. Thank you. Horst.
Dr. Bill, you hear me?
Yes, you are. Oh, God, you sound great. How are you?
Oh, that's good. It's strange. I could barely. It's like when Agnes was telling you that I was calling in, I could barely hear her. So that's.
I could barely hear her too. I think that.
Oh, okay.
I think that has something to do with her. But you sound great.
Okay, great. I was a little concerned. Yeah,
Oh, that's fine. How you doing?
Yeah. Oh, well, not too bad. Can't complain. I mean,
Tomorrow's
except for all the obvious stuff.
tomorrow's Thanksgiving. That's an obvious thing, and it's great.
Well, not in Taiwan, it's not, but it's okay.
Okay.
It's, never has been.
Not a big day there, huh?
Well, I have to work. It's a Thursday.
Okay.
Oh, wait, sorry. Today was. No, actually, today was Wednesday. I get confused. The time zone throws me off both ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Thursday is Thanksgiving Day here. Yes.
No, I get that. I still I feel like it's already been Thursday, but I've been watching Facebook posts and people have been like putting up Thanksgiving things for like the last 2 days straight. So
and today in your world, today's the day.
Yeah, well, it's coming up, and today I will go to work and do what I normally do because that's what we all do.
Yes, I understand. I understand.
Right. Yeah.
So you sound great.
Oh well, it sounds. Yeah, I've got a very good connection with you too, so that's
good. That's great.
That's good. Positive. I know that you were kind of apologetic almost about spending so much time on the Electoral College issue, so that kind of I almost feel equally hesitant to bring that up.
Oh, no, go right ahead if you want to. That's great.
It's a subject that's near and dear to my heart because this is one of the things that I spent a lot of time when I was in university. In my last year, actually, one of my courses was I took it dealt specifically with the founders, and I was a classics major, and the course dealt with classical legacies in the design of the Declaration, the Articles, and the Constitution. And
right.
I spent a long time on the Electoral College, and I don't know if you remember, but like a few months ago, I called in. And I had said I'd done some recent research, and I'd found out something I'd never known in my prior research. That was how closely the idea of the Electoral College was tied to the Three-Fifths Compromise originally.
Right.
That was something that I had previously been unacquainted with.
Right.
But even beyond that, I meant to look this up before calling you in, but I've been hither, thither, and yon, and I've only been able to catch this and that for the last couple of days. So I do not remember which amendment it was off the top of my head that repealed certain sections that, like the requirement that made the Senate vote a matter of direct popular vote as opposed to what it had been before. All that stuff was wrapped up in the Electoral College system. All that was part of a singular system that was designed to. One of the things that I think that we lost in that process was it seems that originally, as the system was constructed, it was built on a bottom-up grassroots model of people voting for people that they knew either personally or had some direct connection with, like in their neighborhoods. And the only national office you actually voted directly for was the House of Representatives, because again, these are people that you had direct access to.
Right.
So the electors of the president, nobody back then, and nobody for that matter today, has direct access to the presidential candidate. And so as a matter of, it's just a natural consequence that you are not in a position to make a direct personal judgment of this person's character, their qualifications. I mean, you get what you get in terms of advertising, but it all rolls way downhill. And by the time it gets to you, it's really you're taking a lot of things on faith from this person, that person. And as we've discussed many times in our adversarial justice system and our adversarial system of determining truth, it really comes down to who has the best argument wins the day. And the arguments do not have to be based in fact. In fact, they're actually more powerful if they're based on emotion. Mm-hmm. And this is what we get. And that to me, originally, like I said, before I found the connection with the Three-Fifths Compromise, which maybe I think that throws out, that affects the balance a bit, but I still think in the main, there is this idea that the people at the very bottom of the ladder, and again, we have to bear in mind that these were, landowners, not just everybody,
right?
All these little things we had to keep in mind. But still, even those people were not in a position to judge who was the best qualified person to handle the top job. And so what you would do, what you were qualified to judge, was the people that you knew in your community, the people that ran for local offices, and they in turn would vote for the people that would go. That it was a tiered system,
right?
How many times have you talked about the idea of the best rising, the cream rising to the top?
Right.
And the electoral system in that light makes sense.
Right. It does.
But go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I was just going to say, because I don't want to miss the opportunity, but that was Madison. When Madison's talking about the election of representatives in Congress in Federalist Number 10, he's talking about the same thing, that a tiered system of elections from the most local elections up and up and up until you get to national elections becomes a filtering system. And local connections and local concerns and local pressures, local interest groups and factions and influence and all of those things are weeded out as you go up from tier to tier to tier. It's the same process that you're talking about with the election of the president. It's the same thing.
And it also leads to, on the one hand, there's two different roads you can. There's just a fork in the road there. You either get into like a more merit-based system, or on the other hand, you get like the smoke-filled back rooms where it becomes corruption and favors and cashing in on the process. But that's one of those things. I suppose that's probably one of the big things that they were struggling with at the time they were trying to come up with a system. Like how can we involve the people directly to serve their best interest?
Right.
Once we have a clear idea who they consider the people and their interests. But anyway, let's just and how far we could insulate them from the abuses of the wealthiest classes and the ones who would always choose to magnify their authority and position. So
right.
But it just seems to me like we kind of lost something when we chucked the. Here's the thing: it's like I don't know why. When we when we went to direct elections of the Senate and of the president, more or less, at that point, to me, it would have been a natural move to get rid of the Electoral College too, because that system makes no sense. It has no place, in a direct election process.
Right.
In the original design, it actually has a sensible, logical reason. I mean, you can see exactly, and it is pretty elegant. I mean, and one of the things that kind of throws it off is what happened with the way the vice president is chosen. Okay, that was kind of not a good idea, but at some point I think we threw the baby out with the bathwater, but we kept some of the bathwater. Like the Electoral College is something we should have thrown out. We got rid of something we shouldn't have gotten rid of, but we kept a lot of stuff that we should not have hung on to. Yeah. So it's either one or the other. We have like a mixed bag of both the worst of both worlds in some senses. I don't know. That's kind of how it occurs to me.
Yeah, I understand where you're going, and you're right. At the very beginning, the idea of the tiered system made perfect sense because, as you say, there's no way that the people at the bottom could know the candidates for the highest office in the land, but they knew the people that they trusted to make the who might know them. And as you go up the ladder, then what the people, what you become most dependent on is the reputation of these people. Even though you don't know them directly, you know them by reputation. And what that basically does is eliminate all the people who don't have a reputable reputation. If that makes sense. And so therefore you're pretty much predetermining the kinds of people that you're ultimately going to end up with. And that's really the process. But you're right. Once the two-party system emerges in this game, then the Electoral College becomes almost an anomaly. It makes no sense.
Well, I don't even think it's necessarily consequences of the two-party system as such. I think it's more about the question of direct versus indirect election. Mm-hmm. If my only power as a voter is to vote on people in my community, in my state, in my immediate environs, people that I have access to, that I can inform myself about directly, and I know on reputation from people who are in my particular community, then I can make an informed decision.
Right.
But and if if that's my only power as a voter, then I can focus all my attention on making sure I make the very best choice I can. And I pay very close attention to what these people do once they're elected. And boy, if they do something I don't like, I can give them an earful because they're here. They live in my community, and I have access to them.
Right.
And I can make things hot for them if I need to, or whatever.
Right.
And I can reward them when they do things that I like. I have access. But when you get 2 or 3 steps beyond that, I've got nothing.
No.
And now I've got nothing both ways. I don't have access to that person up, and I don't have access coming down. I really don't know anything about them except what they choose to tell me.
To tell you.
And this is where a thing like Citizens United becomes so massively, that's where it outbalances the whole system. Because all I'm getting a flood of money coming down on top of my head. Right. And it does one of two things. I answered that post of yours on Facebook the other day. For a lot of people who sit in their homes and they get like nothing but one negative ad after another ad, and people calling your phone and direct mails in your mailbox, you want to tear your hair out and say, to hell with it. I don't want to take part in any of this. Right. But there are people who actually that stuff works on, Yeah. So it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it gets the message to the people who are ready to receive it, and for the people who can't stand it, it also alienates them from the process. Right. It drives them away, and that guarantees, that guarantees the results. And that's just one end of it. But another end is this. Look at also one of the other consequences is that on the one hand, we are paying attention to a flood of information coming down to us via advertising or something like that, and emotional appeals and all the non-rational things that generally motivate us how we vote one way or the other, because we're voting directly for the president, a person with, if you ever meet a president in your life, that's like a red letter day. That's a thing to take pictures, to put on your calendar, and make sure that your children know about it. But if you were just like meeting with like a council person in your city or something like that, that's nothing. No. I know that guy. I went to school with him in some cases. And I know that guy. I can trust him. I can't trust this one. Yeah. Now look at what's happened. Because we have, look at the turnout models. People turn out to vote for the president, and they don't turn out to vote for anybody else because their attention has been shifted all the way to the top of the ticket, and nobody really cares about the bottom of the ticket and the local races except for the people who are really motivated. Right. And the people that are really motivated to do that are the angry people who how did the Tea Party, so-called, get their momentum? They got super mad and super motivated, and they started finding out about being, precinct captains and all that stuff.
Right.
And they organized on the grassroots, and then they generated a certain amount of attention, and they've got a flood of money coming to them from political action committees. But otherwise, nobody touches local races.
Right.
Nobody, even among the politically aware people, it's getting increasingly difficult to find people who really understand the differences in policies, platforms between the Republicans and the Democrats.
Right.
But among the people that do pay attention and make it a serious business to follow those races closely, ask them who's running for their school board. Ask them who's running for their city council. I mean, how many of those people are really tuned into these things?
Mm-hmm.
They're not.
No,
because
you're right.
Their attention is out. It's diffuse. It's out there in the macro, and they are not paying attention to their local community issues. And so, the Electoral College, the original design to me was pretty elegant, pretty nice. It has obvious problems, for those of us who believe in self-rule, and I don't know about democracy myself either, but Republican government, I'll go with Montesquieu up to a point, right?
Right.
I'll do that. but for people who are more inclined to that model of government, even that, the Electoral College, the original idea was pretty good. It keeps your concern local, and it keeps you concerned in your particular community. And if you are careful enough, if you're vigilant and you put your attention on those people, and you hold their feet to the fire when they do something you don't like, then you would be less likely to get a bad outcome up the chain.
Uh-huh.
In theory. Now, this is one of those things that I've always kind of wondered how that really worked out, because I know, Jefferson Adams, the whole vice president thing. To me, I wonder if that was the tempest in the teapot, that we just threw the whole thing out, or if there were other things that were going wrong at the same time. I've never really got a good, clear answer on that.
Uh-huh.
So maybe if you have time in future episodes, Dr. Pill, maybe that's something that you could look into. I would appreciate it.
Well, yeah. I'll be honest with you, I never have. But I never have looked into that. But let me focus on one thing you're talking about, and it's just a question that emerges in my mind, or an idea that emerges in my mind based on what you said. And that is the fact that people's attention is directed to the top. Obviously it works because the turnout in presidential elections is so much higher than it is in non-presidential years. And what that means is it gives interested minorities the opportunity to win on the local level because so few people really care about it. Do you think that that's just a feature of the system, or do you feel that there's intent behind that? In other words, go ahead.
I think that's a flaw. I don't think that was intended. I don't think because what you're suggesting is that the people who don't turn out are generally the ones who feel pretty content and feel like there's not a big deal. We don't need to change anything. And so therefore it gets thrown to a handful of a vocal minority. Mm-hmm. Again, it's classic Tea Party. The whole system, if you're diligent and you know how to run the game, you can hijack the entire system with 20 or 30% of the vote.
Right.
Look at Bob has mentioned this in on his own program many times about the entire temperance movement, how they were able to temporarily hijack get the oh good Lord. I don't have my amendments. 18th Amendment.
I can't. I'm not sure of the numbers either.
I'm ashamed of myself. But anyway, they were able to pass the entire prohibition thing for a good long while, and they had nowhere near a majority.
No.
In order to pass that, but they had this this hyper vigilant, hyper motivated group that were also pretty savvy about how to take over the reins of government. So no, the short answer is I don't think that's how I don't think that was intended. I don't think that was ever intended. In fact, if you look at the way, the whole idea of what the Constitution was meant to redress in the Articles of Confederation, I think that's pretty much the opposite. If anything, it was made to stamp out all those little, insurrections, and make sure that the ship of states more or less sailed smoothly and did not turn on a dime.
Yeah. Yeah, because I really think that the what you've introduced here is very important, because you're right. I mean, people's attention is being directed towards the top, but the fact of the matter is they become the people whose attention is focused on the top are really almost totally dependent on information that comes from the top. In other words, instead of the priorities of people being introduced into the system, which they can do at the local level if they know the guy that they're voting for example, as you say, they can hold their feet to the fire or put pressure on them. So in a sense, that means people's influence is at the local level. It's not at the upper levels. And what that means is as you move up, you become less and less a factor in what ultimately happens, and rather you become the recipient of what those people at the top want you to know and want you to think. So the whole process reverses as you move up that ladder. It's almost, it's a very interesting phenomenon. There's no question.
Well, and there's also a substitution process, because as you move up that ladder, the individual citizen loses all power, and that's where money takes over.
Exactly.
Money and organization, but in post Buckley Vallejo, really.
Yeah.
And that was what, 1976? I mean, money has ruled this game for almost 40 years.
40 years, exactly.
It is 40 years. Oh,
yeah,
boy.
76, yeah. Yeah, it's hard to believe it is 40 years. It is. And basically that was, that was the idea that political money is speech. And I mean, that's basically it. Therefore, it's protected under the Bill of Rights. And once, as you say, once you did that, the whole game changed. And you're right. I mean, the people at the bottom are absolutely unable to withstand the pressure of money and influence and opinion, and all those things are being dumped upon them. They're being told this is the way you should act because, et cetera, et cetera. And they really don't have the perspective to counter that.
Right. And once money becomes speech, not only unless you have money, you are silent, you have no voice. After a certain point, you can't even hear your own self think. Right. And that's where we've been for probably the last 7 or 8 years, I'm guessing. And honestly, depending on where you live, imagine if you're like in Iowa,
oh my God,
caucuses.
Yeah. I mean, it's just incredible, because you're right. I mean, the turnoff consideration is critical here. I mean, you're right. People just kind of throw up their hands and say, I just want to shut this whole thing out. And and Trump, it was interesting in that, I don't know if you were able to hear the first part, but that in that interview with the New York Times yesterday, Donald Trump said that about the African American vote. I was able to win 15% of the African American vote. But on the other hand, I was able to keep the African American vote from turning out for Hillary. So in a sense, I won. And he's right.
Yeah, well, that's half true. I mean, I think that the African American vote that didn't turn out for Hillary mostly were people who showed up to vote and were turned away from the polls, in a very targeted, localized sense. 10,000 here, even 4,000 there. This has been a record year for people being turned away, legitimate voters being told they couldn't vote, including people in their 90s.
Right.
Have been voting for their entire lives.
Right.
Oh no, you got to have this photo ID or this and that. Oh, sorry. But yeah, I think that by itself. You mentioned the last couple of days running about how the Ralph Nader candidacy cost Al Gore the 2000 election. It's one factor in out of a list of like 8 things. Any one of all these things happened. This happened. This happened. This happened. This happened. If it weren't for one, it wouldn't have been close enough to even be a contest. But with all these things together, yeah, I'm going to say Gore did it, but not Gore. I'm sorry, like Nader did it. But if he had not been a fact, he played his part. He had a part.
Right.
Just like the butterfly ballot had a part in Miami. Just like Sandra Day O'Connor had a part. But guess what? So did 4 other Supreme Court justices. We never talk about them.
Yeah.
So, all these things, Gore not choosing to campaign with Bill Clinton, that was a part.
Right.
If you take away any one of these things, then we're looking at a different calculus, and we're looking at possibly a different outcome. And it's the same thing this year. We don't even know.
Well, Trump made the point about, and which I think was on one of the things I got out of this interview. If you read, and again, the transcript is on the internet. It's on the New York Times webpage. It's also on Michael Schmakanis's webpage, which is schmakanish.com. He's got the full transcript of the meeting with the New York Times on there. One of the things that I picked up on in reading that, just reading the transcript of that particular meeting yesterday, was the fact that Trump is really a little bit more insightful than he's given credit for. I mean, he's pretty much aware of a lot of these things that I think people have accused him of not knowing about or caring about or whatever. I mean, one of the things, Bob and I were chatting about this before we went on the air today. One of the things that comes out in that is that Trump believes that, and this is the emoluments clause, but Trump believes that when all these allegations about conflict of interest between his business and his role as president-elect and his projected role as president, that his belief is that this emoluments clause doesn't apply to him as president. That there really is no conflict of interest when you're talking about the president, and that's like that smacks of Richard Nixon.
Well,
I mean, that's pretty sharp. I mean, when you think about it, he's pretty sharp, because what he's basically saying is, and pointing to, is the emoluments clause of the Constitution is not in Article 2, which relates to the executive branch. It's at the end of Article 1, which relates to the legislative branch. So in a sense, Trump's argument or position that the president can't be accused of conflict of interest because the emoluments clause doesn't apply to him. If it was directed at him, it would have been in Article 2 rather than Article 1. Good point. Good point.
That, to me, that's more reflective of boy, where to start? You mentioned earlier, it's like the argument with, he said that he wasn't in favor of the Electoral College until it was in his favor.
Right.
And then he became to appreciate the value of this and that and how I went. That's a guy who is stuck, and he's got somebody working under him and saying, like, here, quick, give me an answer. How am I going to answer this question? And they go and research the heck out of it, and they come back and say, here's what you want to say when someone asks you about that. Mm-hmm. The emoluments clause, do you think everything that we know about Donald Trump going back to the last 20
years. Do you think he ever heard of it?
Believe he ever heard of know what an emolument is?
Yeah.
And do you think he ever went to the dictionary one time to find out No, of course not.
Okay.
He's not a person that has that kind of capacity.
So
but,
what you're saying is this is all prepping him after the fact.
Oh no, it's either prepping him or he went and actually he's good at delegating these things. I'm not really sure about that, but no, I'm not going to give him credit for being savvy about these things because I don't think he cares. He is very good at. You said he's savvy about following polls and stuff like that because he's a person who's very concerned about his managing his image, his public image.
Yeah.
Anything that's good for him, he's going with that. He's like an evil Oscar Wilde kind of a character. Like, if someone's talking about me, I'm going for there, and I'm going to grab this, and I got one move. I'm going to attack. I'm aggressive. If you've ever played a chess player who only never plays defensively, always offensively, that's his style. That's what he does, and so he's got people working under him. It's like, hey, you're the hot shot with the economy. Find a way, you go give me an argument. I'll come back. I'll hit these people. Something like that. Yeah. That's pretty much what I see happening here.
Okay. Well, I agree with you about the emoluments clause. I don't think he ever heard of it before. And I think what raised the question was the fact that so many people are raising flags about the conflict of interest issue. there's a law professor at the University of Minnesota that basically made the case that already Trump has done some things during the transition. The minute he takes the oath of office, in effect, he's broken the law. He's violated his oath.
Yeah, we're back to the Bush administration. Catch me if you can.
Yeah.
If you can make it stick, then we have a law. If you can't enforce it, then hey, guess what? Hit the bricks. You get the highway. We're gonna change history, and that's basically it.
Horst, can I ask you an opinion question?
Sure. I've got lots of opinions.
Okay. Well, I mean, this is just a general thing.
Yeah.
Given all we've been talking about here we're not even into a Trump administration yet. And already we're raising all these kinds of issues. What do you think the next 4 years poses for us? I mean, what do you think all of this means in terms of what's liable to happen over the next, never mind 4 years, just the next couple of years, next year? I mean, what is your sense? Because, obviously you're very, very much, you spend a lot of time, you're very familiar with some of the issues and some of the things that are going on during this transition. So what do you think the outcome of this is going to be once Trump is sworn in as president? I mean, are you as frightened as a lot of people are about a Trump presidency? Are you relieved? I mean, if you read this interview with the New York Times, you get the same feeling that you did at the end of the 60 Minutes interview last Sunday, a week ago Sunday, with Leslie Stahl. You get the feeling, well, he's not going to be that bad. He's backing off on a lot of the most strident positions he took during the campaign. So really, this ain't going to be that bad. I think that's what a lot of people are probably concluding. I mean, that was the conclusion if you read the interview. He backs off the prosecution of Hillary Clinton. He backs off the abolition of the Affordable Care Act. He backs off the massive deportation of illegal aliens and illegal immigrants in the country. And you begin to say, well, maybe this isn't going to be that bad. I mean, it's going to be different from Obama, but it's not going to be the disaster that we worried about prior to the election. I was wondering what you think about this.
I'm mostly worried.
Are you?
And part of it is like that Leslie Stahl piece kind of gives me an indication that we can't count on the media to really step up and do what we really desperately need them to do, that they didn't do through the entire campaign, didn't do through the Obama administration, didn't do through the George W. Bush administration before that, and didn't do during the election 2000 crisis. In other words, to me, this is more the media is kind of just smoothing this over and trying to make a pretty story out of this. Let me tell you what I think about an analogy that has occurred to me in recent days about Trump's ascendancy. I subscribe to the idea that a lot of people do, that he really never really wanted to win the office.
Okay.
And number two, never expected he would do that.
No, I agree with you there.
If you look, at photos and video of him like in the first 12 to 20 hours, something like that, he looks like a shocked.
Yeah.
Like, what do we do? Dr. Bill, do you remember that movie from the 80s, Ghost, with Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore?
Very well.
And you know what happened, like when the bad guys get killed? There's this climactic point near the end of the movie where Patrick Swayze has been chasing this guy that murdered him and is trying to kill his wife.
Right.
And that guy dies. And then his spirit rises out of his body and he's just stunned. He's like, what's going on? What happened? What is this? And then the next thing, and he looks, almost sorry for a second. Uh-huh. And then the next thing all the shadows rise up and all these sounds, and all these things come out of this corner, that corner, and like 5 or 6 and 7 and 20 things just grab him and pull him off down to the depths of hell.
Right.
That to me is exactly what's happening to Donald Trump right now. He did not want this. He didn't expect this. he won, and he's like, what do I do now? And you know what? All those shadows, that's the GOP establishment. That's Paul Ryan. That's, Steve
McConnell.
Bannon. That's the freaking Nazi party. That's all these people that are like, yeah, we own you now. And
right.
He, like I said last week, he's going to dance. He's going to dance with the people that brung him. And he may be able to soften a little bit, but I don't think he's going to, because he can't control this ride. He's not. It would be one thing if it was just him, but it's not just him. It's the Senate. It's the House. And because of this particular year, it's the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. We're going to take that ride with him all the way down wherever it goes. I'm afraid of this.
Now, I have not. I've got to say that I've not heard it put like this before. This is really interesting. When I ask you the question, I didn't expect an answer this substantive. And I mean, really, what you've said is really worthy of some serious thought, because, this is really important. The question of whether, do you believe that he got into this? And the reason I'm not sure I agree is because he doesn't seem the type that gets into anything that he doesn't want to win. You know what I'm saying? To me, I just get the feeling like he's not comfortable with ever losing anything. And so my feeling is, when he made the decision to go for this, and I don't know whether that pummeling he took from Obama at that at that dinner,
at the press corps dinner,
press corps dinner. Everybody says that's the point at which he made up his mind, that it was more spiteful than anything else. But the fact of the matter is, when he made the decision to go for this, at the beginning of the campaign, he would say frequently, not frequently, but more than a couple of times, I don't need this. I've got a good life. I don't. But then as the campaign went on, you heard that less and less, and suddenly this became something he had to win. And so I don't know, but I agree with you. I don't think he expected to. I think it's come out in the last couple of days that his staff, the people closest to him, didn't think he'd win either.
Oh, well, the story, like when he met with Obama's team for the first time, and the reports were that they apparently had no idea that they would have to replace the entire staff in the White House.
Right.
Like, you guys are going to work for us, right? And they're like, no. What are you talking about? Like, yeah, who knows? That may be anecdotal, but
yeah.
No, but as for the other part, of course he's competitive. It's gotten him where he is, but at the same time, the idea that he wouldn't take no for an answer, he just settled that Trump University, lawsuit.
Right.
And he's settled many lawsuits. He's always claimed, I never settled, but the fact is he does.
He does.
Now, the thing, he doesn't publicize when he settles. He's a guy, like, it goes back to the Oscar Wilde thing. He's very, very, very aware of his public image, and he manages that. He curates that with a very particular emphasis. And if I can sacrifice this here, and if I can get away with that there, who cares? Yeah. I'm trying to build a brand. The whole, his business is not even about like making successful businesses. It's about selling his name. Mm-hmm. That's really how he's gotten where he is, to the extent, and there are many times he could have lost the entire thing, but for some reason, he was just good enough at selling his name that people would continue putting money into it, just because. And look what he did in Atlantic City. It's just he can't run a business. He can't run a business, but he can license himself. He just won the rights to do it in China. He's got the same thing in India now, I think, and Turkey. He's the most conflicted president in the history of history. Right. But catch me if you can.
Yeah.
That's the name of the Republican game. Hillary Clinton, Benghazi email, and we can talk about this for 2.5 years solid without even stopping.
Right.
But if George Bush is president and 90 people get killed at consulate attacks, no one ever discusses. It's not even a footnote in history. Now, that's why I think what really disturbs me more about that whole interview and about what we've seen in the press since then is they really look like they're ready to play ball.
The media.
We don't. Yes.
Yeah.
The Fourth Estate. Oh, good Lord.
Well, I mean, when you began this, when you first responded to the question, you went directly to the media.
Yeah.
And I think with good reason, because I think you're right. I don't even think the media, if you had to think what the internet, what television, what 24/7 news has done to that profession, it's, if you had to sit down and say, who are, of all the people that I see day after day involved in the news, who are the real journalists here? How many David Broders are there out there?
I mean, like, it's like the average presidential voter. How many media viewers are even in a position to judge or to recognize who a journalist is and who's just a talking head, who's just a face?
Right. And I think that's what Fox News reveals to us. To me, is the difference, because you've got these empty suits and short dresses on Fox News. I mean, and everybody sits in the, there's always some female sitting in the leg chair. And that Ailes talked about that, the leg chair.
Right.
And I mean, that was a key feature of his, and that really says it all. But the fact of the matter is, what you point out is that the media is in fact playing the role that Roger Ailes and these other peoples have redefined it for. I mean, have defined for it, I guess is a better way of putting it. And they've ceased to be journalists, and they've ceased to dig the news. And of course, Trump deals with it by saying false, mistake, lie, doesn't matter.
Right.
All of it rolls off.
And he can have a secret meeting with them and say, guess what? You're on my team now, or watch yourself.
Yeah.
And it's as if the media didn't put him where he is. I mean, like, they weren't essential.
Yeah.
In this whole fiasco, but he's going to seize even well. And again, I don't want to give him too much credit for exactly knowing how to be like a tyrant or a.
Yeah, he's just driven by the brand, by the issue.
No, and like, it's like you were saying, like, did he plan to? How can you square the idea of a guy who didn't want to win in the first place with this competitive instinct? I think it's like a drug addict, like someone doing cocaine. Like, I got one line, that feels pretty good, and like he gets the positive feedback from the crowds. He gets positive feedback. I keep winning. My God, I beat Jeb Bush. I beat Chris Christie. Are you kidding? Oh, yeah. I'm gonna throw some stuff out here. I won. Are you joking? And like, it just builds into this frenzy of like, well, I'm unbeatable. I'm top of the world, Ma. And the next thing you know, he's whatever. I mean, like,
man, that's really effective. That is so great. That is.
I wanted to bring one more thing up before we close tonight, because this is the end of the week, and I did not necessarily. Well, I know that's kind of an empty thing for me, since I usually do this, but I did not necessarily mean to close out the program.
Oh, that's fine. No, go right ahead. Raise the other issue. I didn't mean. Well,
one other little thing, because you mentioned social media, and the way he's the Twitter president. Oh, good Lord! I didn't even think about the word president until just now, but the way that he uses Twitter as his way of being a populist kind of a person. Right. And again, this goes back to the original thing of the Electoral College, and how the people at the very bottom are getting rained on from the top with just words and propaganda. And in this particular case, just someone who speaks from the gut. I mean, it's like that old thing that Bill Clinton said back in the 90s, Republican voters would rather you be wrong and strong. Just be strong. Just resonate. Just have that visceral connection. And it brought me back to a story that you were relating, and I the history I don't remember, but you'll get this for sure. Mm-hmm. Like when the American Republic was new under the Articles, and there was some well-heeled, genteel person out there, and he saw like some other lowly citizen who was wearing buckles on his shoes.
Right. Yeah, I remember that quote. Yeah.
And he was just incensed. Who do
the hell do they think they are? Yeah.
He's going to put buckles on his shoes like he's as good as me, And the one thing that's always kind of stuck with me is like that there's two aspects to that. On the one hand, there's the social there's the sense of like one person, like if I think I'm genuinely more deserving and a better, higher being than this person over here, like this is some little gutter snipe and they're going to put some buckles on their shoes and suddenly they're my equal.
Yeah.
But there's the other thing. What if you're a brain surgeon and you're in the street and someone else puts on, scrubs and gloves and puts a mask on and stuff and says, I'm a brain surgeon too now.
Uh-huh.
And it's like, now hold on, you can't, just putting the clothes on just because you're allowed to doesn't automatically confer to you all the expertise and all the knowledge and all the ability and all the wisdom that it took for me to get to this level if I'm an actual brain surgeon, which incidentally I'm not, for those out there wondering. But
right.
But if I were, if that's all it took is like, oh, you just put in the uniform on and now you think you can play the game. I've always been kind of ambiguous about that. Like I never really was sure, which way it was taken. Was it just, an elitist saying like, oh, you think you're my equal now because you think you're as good as me? Or is it more like, now you think you got buckles on your shoes and you know as much as I do? I've always been kind of unclear about that. But it's one of those things. And now we get to like this electoral college thing. We get to the and the populist thing with the Twitter. It's like a lot of it's very easy to mobilize people on the basis of completely non-rational, non-factual. I mean, you Dr. Bill, I don't know if you actually mentioned this or not, but now like post-truth has become the word of the year, according to the Oxford Dictionary or whatever it was. Like one of them, post-truth. My goodness, what are we going to do?
Yeah, I know.
Are we going to even live to 2017?
Yeah,
like that's all these things are connected together. And so you mentioned you were talking about social media and the Twitter thing earlier. So I wanted to make sure I got that little.
Oh wow, yeah, that's great because you're right. It's all lacking in substance. I mean, basically the whole idea of the social media contact, the fact that he has 15 people on his Twitter account, is the fact that he can control them that way. The possibility is it's two ways. And they could basically use their access to him to affect him, but it doesn't work that way. It's buckles on your shoes. That's as deep as it goes, I think.
Yeah, maybe.
And
anyway, that's my little contribution.
Okay,
hey,
buddy,
thank
you. I appreciate it.
By the way, happy Thanksgiving to you and yours.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Look forward to next week.
Okay, thank you, buddy. I appreciate you. Thank you. Wow, it's tough to. What a great way to end the week. I mean, that's 2 weeks in a row now that we've had the pleasure of horse calling from Taiwan and closing our week, and it's just incredible. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I know that you, as a listening audience, did as well. I think that some of the perspective that he brings to the Electoral College, and he's right. That there is something very, very creative and insightful about the Electoral College, about this tiered idea that the Electoral College idea, a concept, was built upon. Because the further up you go, the less contact with reality the people at the bottom have, and the more vulnerable they become to what they're told from levels above them. And so the issue of power shifts. When you're at the bottom level or the most local level, the people have power. But the further up you go, the less and less direct contact they have, and the more vulnerable they become to what they're being told from above. And so the process of going up the ladder is that power shifts from one level to the other. And that is exactly what James Madison was talking about in Federalist Number 10 when he talked about enlarging the sphere. That what you do is you shift decision-making from the local level to the national level through this process, through this enlarged sphere process. I think it's absolutely fantastic, and I so thoroughly enjoyed Horst's call. We're at the end of it. What a way to end the week. I can't improve on that. So I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to Horst. I want to say thank you to Bob Kincaid, Agnes, and the folks at Head On. And most of all, I want to say thank you to those of you who continually listen and support the Head On Radio Network and the Virtual Center as well. I hope that you have a wonderful Thanksgiving and a wonderful weekend to go with it. And Lord willing, we'll be back here the first of the week. And I'm sure the one thing we know about Donald Trump, there's going to be a lot more happening between now and the next time we get together. For the Virtual Center and for all the folks that I mentioned, thank you so much. Have a wonderful holiday. Make sure you love those who matter the most to you. And thank you.